for coming along. We should do about an hour at the most on this, so we have time for questions and discussions, brickbats, comments, elements of disagreement, that's all. Entirely fair enough. I've called this Engels before Marx, and that's the last time I'm going to use the M word until we get near the denouement. That is because that person, once he's mentioned and appears, crowds other people out and gobbles up their past, their present, and their future by being, a huge magnetic force. So this is very much about Engels. So images are important, and you'll see a lot of images. The one on the left here, that's a biographical study that I did in 1983 called Friedrich Engels, His Life and Thought. And on the cover of that book, I wanted the young Engels, whom you can see in this Photoshop version, on the we're left and right, okay, we're the other way around here. So the other book, the one with the young Engels on the front, you may recognize. This is Tristram's Hunt, 2009 biography, the frock-coated communist. On the study that I did in 1983, I wanted the young Engels, and the publishers refused, so nobody would recognize the other person. So things have moved on in 25 years, I'm delighted to say. And I'll position what I'm saying tonight rather against Hunt's biography, so that you can kind of see the difference. And it's therefore, I've got some differences, so I'm positioning myself against that as we speak. So here's the daguerreotype of about 1840 that you saw photoshopped in the Tristram Hunt biography. They've given him a pocket watch there that he didn't really have. It kind of Paul Smithed up his jacket to make him a bit smarter. But there he is, I think about 19 or 20. And one of the themes here is going to be sort of industry and technology. Daguerreotypes had only been invented a year or two before. This is the very first photographs. And I think this is when he is in Bremen, the seaport. So he's on the case in getting himself photographed, before it was common at all. So a little bit of context here. I really want to emphasize that it's anachronistic and misleading to talk about Germany until we get to 1871 and the Imperial Constitution and the really rather accidental unification of Germany as an empire under the Kaiser. Rather unexpectedly, the French emperor picked a quarrel with the Prussians, lost, got himself captured ignominiously. The Prussians invaded Paris, and everyone else in the German states, principalities, and statelets said, "Okay, that's over. We're not going to, we're going to be unified with the Prussians now, and that'll be that." So it was a little bit accidental. But this, I put this map up because this is the German Bund, or so-called Confederation, from 1815 until 1866, which is the formation of the North German Confederation after the Prussians unexpectedly defeated the Austrians. And at that point it was clear that there were going to be two Germanys, as it were, and that this bit, the western bit, outside of what we recognize now as Austria, was going to get an act together. So the point really here is to say that the 1815 settlement after the end of the Napoleonic Wars was really there to put the Holy Roman Empire back together after the French Revolutionary armies had gone across Europe, creating sometimes constitutional regimes and sometimes monarchies that were for the benefit of Napoleon and his relatives. But the Code Napoleon and constitutionalism spread with the French Revolutionary armies and famously spread into the Rhineland. So you can see the River Rhine in the kind of purple bit running along there, and that's the part of Prussia, West Prussia and the Rhineland that we're really interested when we're situating Engels. So the point about putting the Holy Roman Empire back together here is that the non-constitutional, authoritarian, religious, conservative monarchies were put back in place in order to see that popular sovereignty, constitutionalism, representative and responsible government, accountability of the government to the rule of law, and all of that was not going to happen. And if you think about it, of course, the legitimist monarchy was put back in France, and this is before the so-called Great Reform Act, which didn't reform very much here. So you really have to get into the mood to get out of where we think we are in the modern world and to get back to oppressive, repressive situations in which the church and the state are the same. There really is no politics that's supposed to happen. There's not a public, there's no public debate. This is a situation in which land and people were said to belong to families and individuals, not the other way around. So this is where we are in 1815. Engels is born in 1820. So this is the kind of situation we're growing up with. And it's the Middle Ages, really. That's the point of all the different states, principalities, grand duchies, Margrave, Yates, and other kinds of bits and pieces, particularly in all that little mishmash in the middle. So they've all got their own little currencies. The sulphurine, or customs union, is barely an idea at this point. It takes a long time getting off the ground at all. This is basically the situation. The point about that is that anything that smacks of representative and responsible government, written constitutions, accountability of rulers to the rule, is forbidden. That is terrorism. Because of the French Revolution and all the things that led to, as Lady Bracknell said. Not least the spoliation of the churches, throwing out the images, setting up temples of reason, I mean, if you can imagine. And so not just disestablishing Christianity, but doing all of that really quite violently. And then, of course, chopping off the monarch's head. So this is big stuff. And you have to get into a situation in which you've got repression and resistance. So we're on the resistance side here, and that's the theme in looking at the young Engels as we do. So let's get him born. So this is actually the Geburtshaus, but you can't go and see it because it got a direct hit in World War II. And actually every single place that Engels lived in Manchester has been demolished. So there's a bit of a theme here. And you'll see what happens in the end. So this was built in the year of his birth. His great-grandfather founded a spinning thread, wool, cotton kind of enterprise in one of the rare bits of industrialisation. So if you think Derbyshire and Yorkshire and the valleys and the kinds of mills that are set up there to do that kind of thing, this is where you are. So that is a view, contemporary view from where the house was. Looking back to the house on the right, which was the grandfather's house and Friedrich's father's boyhood home. I can't remember what they're doing with the house that's on the left up there. You can see there's a railway viaduct, I think, in the background, and some industrial buildings. So this is a family compound erected in the days when factory owners lived next to the factories and looked after the workers more or less. In this case, quite a lot less. So it's kind of like the ancient TV series Dallas, you know, where everybody's in this kind of family company and all live pretty much in the same sort of space. So this is the school on the left that Engels goes to, the local school, and on the right that's the cover of an ancient history, as it says, notebook that belonged to his father and that he took over. So we're getting him now up to age 13 or 14 as a schoolboy. Now I'm positioned here rather against Tristram Hunt's biography and rather against the genre of intellectual biography in general. That is that things that teenagers do are by definition juvenilia because they're not, therefore, the real thing. So I'm kind of proposing to invoke that and to try to drum up some enthusiasm for material that I think is really quite unusual and interesting and exciting. Now, the other thing that happens in Hunt's biography, as indeed generally, is that it's assumed that politics is one thing, and you know, art, music, literature, culture, poetry, drama, and all these other things can be politicized, but they're essentially separate avocations, so you know, entertainment or something that isn't actually politics. But the point about the repressive regimes that I'm making here is that there isn't supposed to be politics, so politics has got to be conducted through the medium of what we would understand as culture. So the only way that you can do politics is go through culture. So art, music, drawing, poetry, painting, all of these things are going to figure as a way of doing politics because there isn't another way. And you're lucky to get away under such a strict regime of censorship with anything that says very much that could be construed as subversive. So as we'll see, there's quite a lot of Bible thumping, Bible reading, you know, oppressive orthodoxy going on here, which is, you know, you should be in church reading the Bible and you really don't need that much else, unless you belong to the court circle, where of course you could be trusted with foreign ideas, but they're not really for the people. So there's a lot of tension going on here. But if you see, you know, art is for art's sake and things like that, you're just going to miss the point. So I think Tristram Hunt is not alone in kind of skipping through the so-called juvenilia and not paying enough attention to the politics that's actually going on in coded form in things that we might think were, you know, purely avocational or something other than politics. So if we look at this book, we can kind of get started where we are with the teenage Engels. So here we have some really rather nice watercolors preserved for us. These people never threw anything away. And we have schoolboy stuff about battles. I think this is something to do with the Barbary pirates, but you know, who knows? I mean, it's a romantic era kind of stuff through the schoolboy, you know, swordplay and imagination. He's clearly interested in costumes and that kind of thing. here we are. I think this one's actually quite interesting. Notice the black slave on the margin and the old black servant. Yeah, I think that's possibly a white slave Christian there in the red. Exactly who the other people are, you know, I don't know, but they're clearly meant to be foreign and not Christian. So we're kind of what's usually described as, you know, dreamy romanticism, but it's actually not that dreamy. I mean, it may be a bit fanciful here, but I think we're getting the glimmerings of struggle, if perhaps not all that much readily intelligible theory at this point. Here's some more, and we've got tents and encampments. This is a little bit more towards the medieval Germany Nibelungenlied world that was also kind of popular at the time. But we've got somebody with imagination who's interested in conflict and in struggle and in weaponry and things like that. Masked soldiers. There we go. Christian church back there. I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. That's a bit more medieval with the crossbow and that kind of thing. So this is a little excerpt from Engels' father writing to his friend and confidant Friedrich. Had a pretty average school report last week. He's become more polite outwardly, but in spite of the severe chastisements he received earlier, not even the fear of punishment seems to teach him unconditional obedience. Thus today I was again distressed to find in his desk a greasy book which he had borrowed from the lending library, a story about knights in the 13th century. So it's quite well known about this family. They are pietist, evangelical Christians, don't see much need for book learning. It gives you bad ideas, and you know, you should go into business and the family trade. So shortly afterwards, Engels is packed off to board and be straightened out and disciplined, since his dad has given up on him to a certain extent. There we are, a bit more struggle. Okay, so moving on here, school leaving report. He's 17. Shows facility for languages, Latin, Greek, French, a commendable interest in the history of German national literature, writes the headmaster. Now I think it's important to get our heads around another idea here, which is that during this period, liberalism and nationalism go together, happily. There's probably 50 years, maybe even 100, when this is so. And the reason for that is, as I said, peoples and lands belonged to families, according to the dynastic authoritarian rule of the time. So, therefore, something to do with getting the people together to be a folk or a nation, and to form a group from which sovereignty could come bottom up instead of top down, was itself extremely subversive. So you have to get your head around the idea that nationalism is an anti-aristocratic, anti-authoritarian, revolutionary idea. And it's perceived that way. It's not just dreamy medievalism, and we'll see which way the teenage Engels takes this kind of thinking. So, he gives a celebratory declamation, which he's written himself in Greek, Eteocles and Polynices. But rather more interesting from this period is something called a pirate's tale, which appears to be schoolboy nonsense, but Eine Seeräubergeschichte actually references Schiller's scandalous band play Die Räuber, in which common criminals are portrayed in a sympathetic light. Mm-hmm. So this was, you know, a highly controversial band play with all the wrong ideas in it. And what Engels, the teenage Engels, so he's about 14 or 15, gets up, 16 actually by this time, gets up to, it's a pirate's tale, but it's really about a German lad who's coming up to age 16, who joins a trading ship, which is really a ruse for fighting against the Turks on behalf of the Hellenes. So it's really a story and parable about the Greek struggle against the Turks, and that itself is a metaphor for the people fighting oppression, absolutism, authoritarianism, brutality, and all those kinds of things. So it's not just an ordinary pirate tale. The struggle against the Turks, this is contemporary really. It's 1821 to 25 or so, as a famous struggle. Byron and Shelley and others involved in this kind of thing quite famously, and this is only a very, well, it's after he's born, I mean it's practically his boyhood, so this is contemporary stuff. And you know, if you're 16, you don't have to sit down like this, nobody told you. So I think we're on to something here. So what we're trying to do is sweep away feudalism, intolerance, obscurantism in favour of personal, political liberation of peoples. We got rebellion, struggle, resistance, and heroism. So at age 16, we're going to launch our literary career. And this is how Engels did it in a local newspaper. And it's a translation. It's a translation into German from a French translation of a novella called The Brazilian Bride by Caroline Norton. Anybody heard of Caroline Norton? Good. Yeah, exactly, yes, before that. So this review was found, you know, by scholars in a local paper. It's signed F.E., so I'm pretty convinced it's a translation. So I'm you know, pretty convinced it's him. So the point about this is that Caroline Norton was married to Mr. Norton, who was a well-to-do barrister. She was quite a close friend of Lord Melbourne, who you will know was in and out of the Prime Ministership in the 1830s, and her husband brought an act against Lord Melbourne for seduction. So this was, you know, reported along in the newspapers as a scandal. And so what on earth is going to happen? It's clearly politics. And Caroline Norton was a campaigner against the miseries of child labour, for one thing. And she also campaigned quite publicly for a reform of the custody laws, because under the custody laws of the time and the marriage laws, as we know, married women had no legal personality whatsoever, no property, everything about them was their husband's. And so he answered for them, and of course he owned the children. So she was denied access to her children, and being quite a good politician in her own way, got Lord Melbourne to get legal reform through the House of Lords and the Commons. The Lords was, of course, much more important in those days, such that married women could bring actions in the court to regain custody of the children if, and only if, they were of spotless reputation. So this is an early kind of forerunner of the Married Woman's Property Act and the sort of further reforms. So she's quite an interesting character, and I think, you know, there's something going on here if he's deciding, you know, that he's going to be the translator for this. We don't have the whole story behind it. But I think, as you'll see, this is symptomatic of somebody who's really interested in politics and in liberation, including supposedly domestic or otherwise, patriarchal kinds of issues. So this is got him published in the local paper. Here is where he goes next. This is the seaport of Bremen, having left school. And after the summer holidays, his father packs him off to join the family company, age 16, in the seaport of Bremen. And there is a bit of a theme here. He's sent to boarding school to straighten himself out. Now he's going to be sent to the family phone to get straightened out. This proves to be a really, bad move on his father's part, because he acquires everything in life that is not to do with domesticity, Christianity, and all of those virtues. So we know that in Bremen he's already in a Singverein. Singverein, this is a very sort of common European thing. Since you can't really get together in public to discuss ideas, you form singing clubs. Literary societies and things like that, where they don't really have enough police spies and snoops to turn everybody in all the time, although this is what's going on. If they find this kind of gathering is an object of attention from spying, the police will come around to your house and etc. Things will follow. And of course, social exclusion is certainly an issue. So he's already in a Singverein, and in correspondence that we have from the period, because he writes to his school friends back home, there's quite a lot of remarks about how he's trying to give two fingers to the Philistines. Philistines are, in this view, reactionaries, obscurantists, people who are too religious or too commercial and don't have any feeling for the arts. And he's actually quite involved with music and mentions Bach, Handel, Haydn, Gluck, Mozart's Magic Flute, not the Italian ones, and the Eroica Symphony really, sent him away. And he criticizes the Italian style as frivolous, and this is good, solid German stuff that he's really supporting. And this, this isn't taking art and politicizing it. This is political in the first place. So if you go back to the Ancien Regime in France, they also had opera wars, but they were the other way around. Rousseau championed the Italian style because it was songful and naturalistic and had, some peasants in it, as opposed to the French style, which was declamatory and about mythical gods and goddesses. So, there's a long history of this kind of coding going on. It's not just for entertainment, and it's also strictly controlled, of course, through the various legal apparatuses that were available to the rulers at the time. So I think I want to stop a bit on the musical angle, because he actually mentions Robert Schumann, and this is Schumann's Neue Musik, which was one of the radical journals, although you wouldn't particularly know it because it's a journal about music. But from what I've said, it's the right kind of music. This is the sort of cutting-edge music that expresses the nationalism and the popular sovereignty and the life of the people that's actually being sponsored. And of course, if you know your Schumann, you know the Davidsbündler Tänzer. Schumann invented a society of David to fight the Philistines, and the dancers in the piano suites celebrate his mythical friends. So it's a kind of early version of the Enigma, except it's much more political and is intended to be radical. But remember, you can't get away with very much, so this all has to go on in a kind of code. At 17, Engels publishes a 10-stanza poem called The Bedouin in a Bremen literary periodical, which emerges as a critique of commercialism, and there's an advocacy of emotional truth. a la Schiller, so we've got another evocation of the common people. It's quite tinged with Rousseau, but you know, he was a well-known revolutionary anyway. So I think this is all part of the same kind of thing, and finding a way to work through these ideas. There's a really interesting unpublished poem called Florida, which is about the punishment by eviction of the Seminole Indians in the 1830s to 1842, so this is exactly contemporary. They're evicted by federal troops from their land, not just for being indigenous people and in the way, or annoying in some other way, but because they were harboring runaway black slaves. So once you dig into this material, you see it's not just casual sort of schoolboy stuff. There is really something going on here. The hero of this is again a German youth who's on the run because he's been involved in anti-monarchical agitation somewhere in the German states, and he is, you know, washes up in Florida, and rather, you know, unfortunately dies at the hand of a free redskin, quote unquote, as a kind of, you know, redemptive sacrifice for white guilt, which is actually in its way also quite interesting, a readaptation of sort of Christian themes going on here. But this is, you know, I mean, the kind of racial political mixture here is a really interesting moment, and you know, we're revisiting that kind of thing all over the place. So coming up to 18, he contacts the big time in this kind of politics through literature, art, culture, and music. This is Karl Gutzko's Telegraph für Deutschland. So this is a literary journal. The Telegraph had only just come into commercial use, so you know, it's not casual that this is called Telegraph. And Engels writes letters to it, and eventually becomes a writer for it, praising liberal sentiments, and apparently getting away with it as a letter writer, although they're, of course, not signed with his real name. He writes in favour of the abolition of religious compulsion, that is the test acts for universities and the professions. He writes for the emancipation of the Jews and the restrictions that were imposed throughout Prussia following the settlement, and in general contributes to this discussion. Needless to say, the paper's closed down in Hamburg and moves to Leipzig in Saxony, where they didn't quite care so much. So you can see this sort of cat and mouse kind of thing that's actually developing. So this is very much, you know, anti-censorship and testing it out. So this, this was to get us in the mood for popular sovereignty of the 1830s. This, of course, is Delacroix, and it's an evocation not of 1789 but of 1830, and their successful revolution against the legitimist monarchy and the overthrow of the Bourbons, who really were you know, put back on the throne. The two legitimist monarchs were, of course, brothers of Louis XVI, who lost his head. So this kind of thing is clearly the inspiration. You know, if they can do it next door in France, Engels is 10. You know, it's we can do it here if we kind of get with the program. But of course, as I've explained, all of the dynastic rulers, you know, that's the last thing they want is all this kind of stuff. This is the Telegraph für Deutschland, and Engels becomes a contributor. Actually, he writes a poem on the German July days of 1839. July days, the 1830 is the July Revolution. And during 1839, when he's 18 years old, and this is the actual page, he works through his feelings about religion, and he writes this really scathing critique of his hometown. This is, of course, published anonymously. So, in this article in a supposedly literary publication, he writes about the river in Elberfeld and Barmen, now known as Wuppertal, the Wupper Valley, pretty close to Neanderthal, actually. And he says, quote, "The purple waves of the narrow river flow between smoky factory buildings and yarn-strewn bleaching yards. Its bright red colour, however, is due not to some bloody battle, but simply and solely to the numerous dye works using Turkey red. In the factories, people breathe in more coal fumes and soot than oxygen, and in the majority of cases beginning already at the age of 6. So it kind of goes on in this kind of vein. And he's particularly got the sort of factory-owning hypocrisy insight. That people are off to church on Sundays, and most every other day, celebrating how virtuous they are when they've actually created these terrible conditions. So he details drink, religion, lung disease, syphilis, and what he does is bring industrialization and social class to what was in other parts of other contributions to the Telegraph, a kind of romantic, liberal, but literary young Germany. This movement around the newspaper was called Junges Deutschland. So he brings something rather special from his own experiences, growing up in the middle of all this in the factory-owning compound, to the kind of liberal literary politics that's actually being practiced. He complains that state school inspectors choose a mediocre reformist evangelical rather than an efficient Lutheran. And it's full of quite snarky sarcasm in it. It's caused a sensation all around Germany. Who wrote this? We know from correspondence he was delighted that people were guessing that it was Ferdinand Fredegrath, who's a poet who figures later on in his life in this liberal circle, also involving Heinrich Heine. These people are exiles in France because it's too hot for them with the police spies around. Was it perhaps Clausen, whose name was on the ancient history book, scribbled by the young Engels, the obviously too liberal schoolmaster of the local school? Engels writes to his school friends, "It was me," and what a great thing. So he does treat it as a schoolboy prank. I mean, later on, he admitted to his school friends that he might have exaggerated a bit. But his pseudonym here was Oswald, and he uses a variety of variations on that, besides F.E. or Friedrich Oswald. This is possibly Oswald von Falkenstein, who was a poet and rebel of the 14th and 15th century, leading a revolt of the Tyroleans against the Austrians. So, there's more coding going on here if you know what's going on. So, Oswald got to be quite famous, and 19 going on 20, Engels is a reviewer for the Telegraph. He writes for 2 papers in Bremen. He writes for papers in Tübingen, Stuttgart, Augsburg, and gets picked up in Berlin. And he describes himself in correspondence as a warrior scarred by censorship. So, I mean, for somebody who's, you know, not even 20, I think this is pretty remarkable stuff, because he's in there with the big time and the grown-ups, and taking kind of grown-up risks, as it were, and you know, certainly his family's not going to be pleased. So at 20, just continuing this theme, this is looking back at Elberfeld. That's Elberfeld's in the top image. So that should, you know, obviously Manchester was not a surprise when he got there, because it looks just the same. That's Leverkusen below, but you get a good look at Elberfeld there. I was interested in the River Wupper. The River Wupper is now a bit of an eco theme park with the wildlife and the fish, and you know, it's all very lovely, and you can go swimming in it, blah blah blah. So I tried to find, you know, in the image. This is from the 1950s, which is about, you know, as near as I could get to it. So that kind of gives you, you know, the impression that this place was only recently became a kind of eco theme park. So when he's 20, Engels actually writes an operatic libretto. The music was never written. This was for a schoolboy production. And it's a libretto, Cola di Rienzi, based on Bulwer Lytton's novel, which had just come out. And Cola is in medieval Rome, not classical Rome, and he leads a revolt of the Roman people against the oppressive aristocracy of the time, which is, of course, you know, dynastically you know, allied with the papacy through the, you know, family structures. In the course of his career in reconstructing Rome, he gets ideas above his station and becomes a kind of duce dictator, and gets overthrown by another people's revolt. So for, you know, the young Friedrich, this is pretty good stuff. You get to revolt against the reactionaries twice in the course of this. And he writes this operatic libretto. The novel's published 1835, German translations in a play 1837, so we're coming up to 1839, 1840. Coincidentally, this is exactly the same time that Wagner is writing his opera, Rienzi, which got produced and is rather more famous, and you don't very often see it now. It's 6 hours long and is sometimes said to be the worst opera that Meyerbeer never wrote. But you know, there's an element of zeitgeist, cutting edge, you know, getting in on the act. So part of the point of reproducing some of these manuscript pages is to pick up the cartoons and doodles and drawings and things. So that will emerge as a theme, which we'll come back to. So you can see some of them here. And his handwriting has become familiar to some of us in circumstances I'll detail later. So there we've got the, you know, nice illustrations. Faces, he's quite good at doodling that. Horses, guys with beards, more weaponry, but you can see the continuity with the earlier materials. I think that must be Camilla, who is rather like the bare-breasted Liberty character leading the charge of the people against the dictator Rienzi, Nicola di Rienzi, as he's become. So he's quite interested in sword-wielding females. Now, I don't claim this makes him, you know, world's feminist #1, but at least he's got some kind of an idea about female agency. It's definitely not domestic. So exactly where it's going is another question. So I think there's, you know, as you can see, I think there's quite a lot going on here. So later on in 1840, 19 going on 20, he finds the Hallische Jahrbücher. This is founded in 1838 by Arnold Ruger, and this is the kind of origin of young Hegelian liberalism. This is the kind of university philosophical take on Hegel to do something with German philosophy that is going to be liberal and revolutionary. So this is the origin of the liberal revolutionary reading of Hegel that's coming out in this journal. So Friedrich has really zero education in philosophy, so it's interesting that he picks it up. Edited by Arnold Ruger, who appears later on in the story. And the basic trope, as I'm sure most of you know, is that Hegel can be read as a conservative reactionary supporting dynastic rule and the Prussian bureaucracy, or he can be read as a revolutionary. That is, everything is in change. In particular, history is the unfolding of the idea of freedom. Freedom must have something to do with the French Revolution in code. And basically things can change and need to move on. So what he does is pick this up really quickly, the revolutionary reading of Hegel. And this derives from Hegel's lectures on the philosophy of history, which were themselves a posthumous editorial production of the 1830s as a way of getting this into circulation. He then writes back to the Telegraph and Gutzko saying, you need to get with the philosophical program because that's really, in a sense, much more where the politics is going, and it will be, so he seems to think, more effective. So at this stage, he could have morphed into another young Hegelian would-be philosopher. But what he does, I think, is interesting, is that he adds to that kind of material a real interest in history as the progressive unfolding of technology. So he's really interested in machinery, transport, and travel. And so his travel writing at 1840 recalls his schoolboy journey when he was 17 with his father to England, and how they went on the London-Liverpool Railway, which had just been opened as a junction trunk connection, London to Birmingham, and then, I don't know whether you changed trains or not, but anyway, you could then continue to Manchester and Liverpool. So he was very excited about that as a 17-year-old, you can imagine, but he evokes that back as something to really pay attention to when you consider history, even from a sort of philosophical Hegelian framework. So screw-driven steamships from Bristol are also on trial famously in 1840s, which is something that he picks up. And he says in his writing, quote, "We will not have to wait long before we can reach New York from any part of Germany in a fortnight. 6-week sightseeing trips will be possible to the United States." And this is, the way that freedom unfolds for humanity in space and time. So I think that sort of writing and interest is pretty rare amongst the young Hegelian university types. So we've now arrived at the next thing after Bremen in his father's program of oppression, which is to send him off to do his military service in Berlin. This is obviously another big mistake. And that is supposed to be him in the military uniform. Now, there are various sources. I don't think it actually is him. But it gets reproduced as him anyway. It's somebody in a military outfit. I guess maybe it could be him. But that's a view of Berlin above, as it was at the time. It was much disparaged in other parts of Germany for being just a boring military camp full of Philistine Prussians. who had no art and culture, Italian opera and sort of things like that. The other image, the image below, is quite interesting. This, I can't quite tell whether this is an early photograph or a very good etching, but it's supposed to be a picture of the festival celebrations outside the Royal Palace for the accession of Frederick William IV. And great hopes were pinned on the new king, that he would bring, Enlightenment, progress, an element of liberalism, maybe even constitutionalism, and to get Germany, the German states and principalities, out of the Middle Ages. So Engels arrives at exactly the right time, when the censorship is somewhat relaxed as a gesture by the new king, and philosophical politics is on the move at the university, both ways. So the Prussian state has cottoned on to the young Hegelian reading of Hegel as a revolutionary. So they appoint Friedrich von Schelling, the philosopher, to the chair of philosophy at Berlin. And they also do their best to discourage that sort of thing in the other universities as well. And Schelling is put up there to put a lid on the kind of wild speculations and to reinforce the importance of Christianity and the conservative order flowing top down through the estates of the realm. So we'll see what Engels does with that. What's he doing at the university if he's supposed to be on military duty and parade living in the barracks? Interesting question. He just went along, as you could do in those days, and skived off the soldiering as much as he possibly could. We know that he went to Schelling's inaugural lecture, which was a great political event, whichever side you were on. And that this sparked a tremendous debate inside and outside the university. This is one of these zeitgeist moments. So at the lecture, in attendance, in the audience, were Jakob Burckhardt, the historian of the Renaissance, Michael Bakunin, the anarchist, Søren Kierkegaard, the philosopher, and Engels. So we don't know if they actually conversed at the reception afterwards, but he was there with he had a real eye for the big time. He's only 20, and he's never been to university. He's not educated to university entrance. So what he does next is actually pretty surprising. And we'll see where that comes from. These are some of his kind of cartoons and doodles from letters from the period. So up there we have his principal occupation in Bremen when he's supposed to be working, which is smoking cigars and drinking beer in the hammock, which I think he had installed in the office. Below there are some sort of little cartoony doodles. That is the emancipation of women in the centre. Next to it is a kind of early locomotive labelled Zeitgeist, so you can see the kind of technological interest. There he is smoking himself to death, as it turned out. And above, this is Die Freie, the Free. These are the young Hegelians in Berlin at their club, smoking, drinking, arguing, and he's done the caricatures, and they're named there. So I think he was a fun guy, and good sort of party material. But he picks up a young Hegelian trope here, that is a political strategy of writing satires that are parodies, publishing them anonymously. So he doesn't really encroach on the actual discussions of Hegel, but he finds a way to be sarcastic and witty. So he actually, he wrote this himself and had it published anonymously, but what it does is that he's posing as a pietist evangelical, and he knew all those people from his hometown, who is writing a defense of Schelling for the benefit of proper Christian evangelical persons who have no acquaintance with philosophical language, which is what the sort of subtitle says there. In other words, they're plain, simple Christian folk, and they won't be able to understand Schelling, so they think, and so this pietist writer will explain to them that Schelling is not, in fact, a dangerous rationalist, because that was his job, was to kind of rationalize a bit, but not too much. So he's not a dangerous rationalist. Actually, he is a straight up and down Orthodox Christian. So what this is saying to liberals and young Hegelians is, don't be seduced by this kind of wishy-washy rationalistic reconciliation of Hegelian philosophy with Orthodox doctrinal Christianity. This is the wolf in sheep's clothing, etc., etc. Here is somebody from the evangelical camp who's exposing, how Christian Schelling really is. So this was a big sensation. It got noticed all the way to St. Petersburg. And there's a theme which you may or may not know about of Russian interference in politics outside of Russia. The Tsar, through his various diplomats and spies, is busy communicating to kings and princes and people like that in the German states and statelets, that they should keep people on the straight and narrow and punish this kind of stuff swiftly and autocratically. So it's kind of unsurprising that the negus turns up in St. Petersburg. So this is showing us how far Engels has got with what were a couple of years early some kinds of religious feelings and bits of Christianity that he fairly swiftly got rid of. So he explains to his school friends when he's 17 or 18 that he has been reading David Friedrich Strauss's Das Leben Jesu kritisch bearbeitet, that is, the life of Jesus critically examined. Well, critically was a word that wasn't welcome in the Orthodox circles, and the application of criticism to anything to do with Jesus and the Gospels was horrendous as an idea. And this book, published in 1835 and translated some years later by Mary Ann Evans, otherwise known as George Eliot, was itself a hugely radical book, because church and state are the same thing. To get rid of the bishop, the king goes, and vice versa. So Engels, we know, had been reading that. We also know that in 1841, Strauss publishes a critical review of Christian doctrine, pretty well demolishing it. We know that Feuerbach's Essence of Christianity came out in 1841. These are all, radical books about politics, because politics and religion are the same thing as Orthodox Christianity from the ruler's point of view. So Engels declared himself in correspondence to be a first-class mythic. Strauss had actually set about to sift through the gospel texts